So for people you know who couldn't attend this, there's an option to hear it later.
That's good to know.
So
Okay,
I think
I'm gonna mute everybody now, and Bruce, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I think I did that.
yes,
Nope, you're muted. You're muted.
well, we can't have that.
Oh, here we go.
So I've unmuted, I think.
Okay, yeah.
You have, and thank you, Bruce, for being here for us. And I'll let you take it away. Just want to remind people, we will be unmuting everyone for a Q&A following his talk. So don't go away.
Well,
All right.
Thank you, Marlene, for inviting me, and thanks everyone for joining. And Melissa, is it possible to do the screen share?
Yeah, yes, you should be able to do it.
Oh, I do that.
Yes.
Oh, okay, let's see.
You're sharing your screen, right?
Right. So let me find the controls. Okay. Share.
There you go.
Okay. So let's roll. Oh, that's not good.
Bruce, I think you can, there's a way to get rid of the sidebars.
Oh, do you want me to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I do that?
Anybody know?
Maybe go to view. Up here, view, on the top left.
Oh yeah, view, right.
We're all learning.
So-
Maybe slide only.
Oh, no, that's not right.
That's not right. Okay.
So let's see.
Go to view on the top.
Go to view on the top. Okay, so hide.
Yeah. And do full screen. Is there something that says hide tab bar?
Hide tab, hide.
Oh, that, is there a way to minimize it? Oh, what have I done?
There is a place, if you go to the place where all the pictures of us are,
Yes.
and you click in there, there's a place to, there's a minimize bar at the top of that.
Minimize bar.
Yeah, but
And that will get rid of that.
All right, let's see.
well, you know.
It gets rid of it on mine.
I think that might be the best I can do at the moment.
Okay,
Okay.
that's fine.
It's good.
Good, okay. Let me get rid of this. Right. All right, thank you so much again for the invitation and the opportunity to talk about one of the classics. When I proposed this topic, I wasn't quite sure what I would find, but I've done some detective work, and sure enough, lots of Jews in the land of Oz, but not the creator. So if we go back to the beginning, the author of The Wizard of Oz was L. Frank Baum. He was a New Yorker, 19th century, and failed at many business ventures, and nevertheless hit the jackpot as a children's book writer. And not just Oz, but many others. However, I was interested in the first place in his title. Where did that come from? And I thought, well, maybe like many people in the 19th century, he knew a little bit of Hebrew, and he understood that the word Oz in Hebrew means strength or courage. But my research quickly revealed that that was not the case. In fact, he got the name Oz from his alphabetized filing cabinet, which ran A through N and O through Z. So that's where the word Oz comes from. Nothing Jewish about that. So we need to do more detective work. Here's a poster from a 1903 musical performance of The Wizard of Oz, and you can see that already at the beginning of the century, the Tin Man is recognizable. But in 1925, there was a silent film made based on The Wizard of Oz, and it wasn't very good. However, it did have the great Oliver Hardy as the Tin Man, and they changed the plot of The Wizard of Oz and made him the villain. So that's one of the reasons why it didn't work. Here's a more familiar cast. Obviously, this is the 1939 cast. There's Ray Bolger, Burt Lahr, Judy Garland, of course, and Jack Haley as the Tin Man. Now, of those, only one was Jewish, and that was the great vaudeville comedian Burt Lahr. But Ray Bolger, I learned, grew up in Boston in an Irish Jewish neighborhood and was pretty much fluent in Yiddish. So I'm counting him as one half of a Jew. There's our cast again. And here's a poster for The Wizard of Oz. And if you look at that poster, except for Burt Lahr, it doesn't look like there are any Jews there, but that too is wrong. So look more closely at the poster and you see produced by Mervyn LeRoy. And it turns out that Mervyn LeRoy, who was a famous director at Warner Brothers in the 1930s, he directed, for example, I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang with Paul Muni, and many other films. One of his most famous films is from the 40s. It's Random Harvest with Ronald Colman and Greer Garson. So he's a really excellent director. But in the 1930s, Louis B. Mayer hired him to be a head of production at MGM. And this was after, there's Louis B. Mayer with his friend Leo the Lion. After the death of Irving Thalberg, who was head of production from the late 1920s through his premature death in September of 1936. So insofar as MGM was the most prestigious of all of the Hollywood film studios, it was largely due to Irving Thalberg. And Thalberg was gone, and Mayer needed someone else to step in as head of production, and he chose Mervyn LeRoy. So Mervyn LeRoy came from a German Jewish background. He was a native of San Francisco. His parents his father had an import-export business, lost all of his money in the 1906 earthquake. And Mervyn LeRoy went on the streets of San Francisco, sold newspapers, and eventually won a Charlie Chaplin imitation contest at the age of 10. And that was the beginning of his career in show business. So he migrated to Hollywood, and by 1923, he was already working in the studio system. So Mervyn LeRoy, who was the producer, head producer at MGM after the death of Irving Thalberg, of course, also Jewish, Mervyn LeRoy knew that Walt Disney had a hit with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 37 or 38, and wanted to do something similar with MGM's facilities, its tremendous technical sophistication. So he wanted something that would be a prestige picture and a fantasy film. Not many of those had been successful. He wanted to do something like Snow White. And so he was the one who pushed for the acquisition of The Wizard of Oz. He got it. L.B. Mayer approved the purchase of the rights to the film. And it was another Jewish film producer, Sam Goldwyn, who had the rights. And so Mayer got the rights, paid for the rights from his old colleague, his old friend, Sam Goldwyn. All right, directors. The director who gets credit is Victor Fleming, one of the great directors in Hollywood history. In the same year that he did The Wizard of Oz, he also directed Gone with the Wind. But he wasn't the only director on Gone with the Wind, and he wasn't the only director on The Wizard of Oz. In both cases, he replaced the man on the right, and that is George Cukor. And George Cukor was from a Hungarian Jewish immigrant background. So for whatever reason, and this happened frequently in Hollywood, in the studio system, I believe in the case of Gone with the Wind, Clark Gable didn't get along with George Cukor, thought he was favoring Vivien Leigh. So goodbye, George Cukor. Hello, Victor Fleming. Well, I'm not quite sure what went wrong on The Wizard of Oz for George Cukor, but he was replaced by Victor Fleming. So really, it's not the director of the film who gives it its Jewish qualities. So that's not the answer to our question. What's Jewish about The Wizard of Oz? Okay, so again, all of the studio heads for the most part in this period, with one or two exceptions, Darryl Zanuck, Joseph Kennedy at RKO, Darryl Zanuck at Fox, most of them were Jewish. That's not a surprise. Louis B. Mayer, of course, was Jewish. But here was someone who hadn't yet produced a film and became associate producer on The Wizard of Oz because of his friendship with Mervyn LeRoy, which went back to their origins in Hollywood in the 1920s. So who was Arthur Freed? One of the greatest producers in the history of Hollywood films. In particular, he had his own unit after this at MGM. He produced musicals. So among them, An American in Paris, The Bandwagon, Fred Astaire, American in Paris, of course, Gene Kelly, Gigi, Leslie Caron. So for 15 years, he made the best musicals in Hollywood. But he started as a songwriter, and one of the songs that he wrote in the late 1920s, or co-wrote in the late 1920s, was Singin' in the Rain. Who was Arthur Freed? Born to a Jewish family in Charleston, South Carolina, began as a song plugger and pianist in Chicago, met Minnie Marks, who was the mother of the Marx Brothers, met them on the vaudeville circuit. That was the beginning of his career, and also wrote material for them. So he began to write songs and eventually, obviously, found his niche at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. It was Arthur Freed who pushed for Judy Garland as the star of the film. She was already under contract at MGM, but others wanted Shirley Temple. It was Arthur Freed who insisted on Judy Garland. And of course, she tested. She had a great screen test. They would have an association, Judy Garland and Arthur Freed, that would run all the way down to A Star is Born in the 1950s. Well, okay, so the producers were Jewish. The studio head was Jewish. The first of the 10 writers on the film was Jewish, and this is the great Herman J. Mankiewicz. Now, those of you who are fans of Turner Classic Movies, you know the host, Ben Mankiewicz, part of the same family. Herman J. Mankiewicz was the brother of Joseph Mankiewicz, and Joseph Mankiewicz was one of the great writer-directors. He directed and wrote All About Eve for Betty Davis. Herman J. Mankiewicz is famous for perhaps the greatest film in the history of Hollywood. He wrote the screenplay for Orson Welles' classic Citizen Kane. So he had started in Hollywood in 1920, well, mid-20s, and I believe in 1927 or 28 alone, had his name on over 20 films. He was prolific, he was fast, but he became known as one of the most brilliant writers in Hollywood, one of the writers who spearheaded the movement of the whole Broadway style of wisecracking, fast-talking, cynical, sentimental entertainment onto the national scene. Where did that come from? He was a member of the New York Circle of Writers called the Algonquin Circle. Dorothy Parker, what's his name? Robert
Benchley.
Sorry, Robert
Benchley.
Benchley. Thank you so much. Robert Benchley, others in that group. He was one of that group of wits and became a prolific screenwriter, very close to another great Jewish screenwriter who was equally witty and equally fast and prolific, Ben Hecht. He wrote a famous telegram to Ben Hecht when he got out to Hollywood: "Come on out here. The money grows on trees. Your only competition is idiots." All right, so there is our another poster, and a poster for The Wizard of Oz. And if we look at the middle of that poster, this one features prominently the composers, the music by E.Y. Harburg and Harold Arlen. Also, you notice down below, there's a name, Leo Feist. Leo Feist was one of the major music publishers in the history of Tin Pan Alley, and MGM bought his company after his death, and so also all of the songs. There's Leo Feist. In fact, Tin Pan Alley, Broadway musicals, and then their extension into Hollywood musicals, very much, with a few exceptions like Cole Porter, the publishers, the impresarios, the lyricists, the composers, almost all of them were Jews. The Great American Songbook is largely the creation of American Jewish songwriters. The publishers were German Jewish. Most of the songwriters were sons and daughters of Russian Jewish immigrants. And here are two of them. That is Harold Arlen on the left, handsome fellow, and his partner, the lyricist, Yip Harburg. So what can we say about them? Without them, there is no film. They were the central players, as it turns out, in the making of this film. All right, they're very close in the quality of their partnership to the most famous partnership of all in songwriting, American songwriting in this period, the brothers George and Ira Gershwin. In fact, Harburg was a high school classmate of Ira Gershwin. So the two of them, as we'll see, shared an enthusiasm for the partnership of Gilbert and Sullivan, for the wordplay of Gilbert and Sullivan, and some of that gets into the lyrics of the songs for The Wizard of Oz. Harold Arlen was born in Buffalo, New York. His original name was Hyman Arluck, and he was the son of a cantor. So a synagogue cantor, a common pattern among Hollywood songwriters and musicians. After all, Al Jolson, the great Al Jolson, was the son of a cantor. Irving Berlin, I believe, was the son of a cantor. So this was a common pattern, but Harold Arlen turned out to be the most gifted of Jewish composers behind George Gershwin in this period. His fellow songwriter, Johnny Mercer, regarded him as second only to Gershwin in talent and originality. There he is later in his career with the great Peggy Lee and Vic Damone. Yip Harburg, the lyricist, was born Isidor Hochberg. Couple of photographs of him. There, the two of them together. Again, relaxing together at the pool. Who was Yip Harburg? A dedicated socialist his entire life. Even his name represents his politics. So, born Isidor Hochberg, but the name Yip, that came from YPSL, the Young People's Socialist League. We're dealing here with a songwriter who was a New York Jewish socialist. He would later be blacklisted for that in Hollywood films. He was born in 1896 on the Lower East Side. Again, attended high school with his pal Ira Gershwin, loved the lyrics of W.S. Gilbert. They also went to City College together, after which he was a conscientious objector, didn't fight in the First World War. According to his son, he did not believe that capitalism was the answer to the human community, that indeed it was the destruction of the human spirit, and he would not fight its wars. But after the war, he came home, got married, had children, became the co-owner of an electric company when it went bankrupt. Following the crash of 29, he was destitute and desperate, and like others in those circumstances, he turned to songwriting. And there his friend, Ira Gershwin, could give him encouragement. All right, let's take an example of wordplay, which is one of the basic contributions of these Jewish songwriters. They are in love with words, with the English language. So take, for example, one of the most famous songs of the Gershwin partnership, It Ain't Necessarily So, from Porgy and Bess. Look at the brilliant rhymes. No one else would have come up with this except for someone with a deep love of the possibilities of the English language. So we can look at them on the screen, but I think it would be better for us to hear them sung, and we'll hear a version of It Ain't Necessarily So by the great Paul Robeson. The one rhyme I would like to underscore, it's one of my favorites. Jonah, he lived in a whale. He made his home in that fish's abdomen. What a brilliant rhyme. The great Paul Robeson singing that great song.
It ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. The things that your preacher is liable to teach you, it ain't necessarily so. Little David was small, but oh my. Little David was small, but oh my. He fought the Goliath who lay low and dieth. Little David was small, but oh my. Jonah, he lived in no whale. Yes, Jonah, he lived in no whale. Now he made his home in that fish's abdomen. Yes, Jonah, he lived in a whale.
Okay, so brilliant lyrics, brilliant rhyming, and that's the model for Yip Harburg as well. That kind of wordplay. By the way, if you're not aware of this, It Ain't Necessarily So contains one of the great inside jokes in songwriting history, because the melody by George Gershwin, that comes from the Jewish liturgy. So It Ain't Necessarily So, if you remember, as we all do, it's a song about the Bible. It ain't necessarily so. He took the melody for the song from the blessing that we say when we're called to read the Torah. It ain't necessarily so. Baruch Hu Esed Hashem Torah. It's the same melody. He took it from the Jewish liturgy. So that kind of wordplay and that kind of borrowing from the tradition of Jewish music, that's something that the Gershwins pioneered, and we'll see other examples of that. Well, let's take the wordplay. So we're off to see the wizard. I've italicized the place where I think Yip Harburg is at his best. The lyrics are familiar to us, but this is Yip Harburg doing what Ira Gershwin did in It Ain't Necessarily So. So these incredibly brilliant rhymes. We hear he is a whiz of a whiz, if ever a whiz there was. If ever, oh ever, a whiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. So again, well, let's just do it. Let's take it.
You're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. You can be a wizard of Oz, if ever a whiz there was. If ever a whiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. You're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. To Oz?
To Oz!
We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. We hear he is a whiz of a whiz, if ever a whiz there was. If ever a whiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
Okay, so famous song, that's Harold Arlen doing what he called lemon drop song, lemon drop music. It's not complicated, but the wordplay is complicated, and that was the contribution of Yip Harburg. Let's take another example of that. So, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. Ding Dong, the witch is dead. Which old witch? Well, the Wicked Witch. Ding Dong, the Wicked Witch is dead. So, let's hear it.
Let the joyous news be spread, the wicked old witch at last is dead. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Which old witch? Wicked witch. Ding dong, the wicked witch is dead. Ding dong, the wicked witch stop your right down a bit. Ding dong, the wicked witch is dead. She's gone where the goblins don't belong. Below your wall. city in the county of the land of Oz. I welcome you most regally. But we've got to verify it legally.
Okay, a little side note here. As far as I know, none of the Munchkins was Jewish. All right. More about Yip Harburg. He hooked up with the composer Jay Gorney, a friend of Ira Gershwin. And the lyric for Brother, Can You Spare a Dime, one of the Great Depression anthems, that was originally written to the tune of a Russian folk song Gurney used in the show Americana, a song that, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime, a song that is both remarkably colloquial and poetic, rooted in the plight of the American everyman who built the railroads and the skyscrapers, fought in the army, and was now on the skids, his hand outstretched. So the first big hit for Yip Harburg was one of the songs that helped to get Franklin Delano Roosevelt elected in 1932. It was a Great Depression anthem. He wrote a multitude of Broadway musicals, songs for movies, but never did forsake his political conscience. Besides Oz, his most famous show is Finian's Rainbow, music by Burton Lane, movie version starring Fred Astaire, examining American racism and breaking precedent with its racially integrated cast and chorus. But a rainbow was never part of the screenplay for the famous 1939 movie. It's entirely the contribution of Yip Harburg. He is the man who brought the rainbow to the Wizard of Oz. Knowing that Dorothy would sing a ballad yearning for escape from the monochrome farmland of her Kansas home in the film's opening sequence, Harburg gave his collaborator Harold Arlen a dummy title, a fragment of a lyric to use to hang to a melody on, a direction, a mood, as a symbol for all the colors unseen to Dorothy in her black and white world. In Kansas, he conceived the rainbow, although the rainbow is never used once in Baum's book. And he also handed Arlen a title, I Want to Get on the Other Side of the Rainbow. All right, all true. And one addition to that, whose idea was it to beef up the Kansas framework of the film? The opening scenes, the closing scene, that was Herman Mankiewicz's idea. So it was Mankiewicz's idea to extend the opening in Kansas before the cyclone hits, to introduce some of the characters who would then play double roles, not just in Kansas, but also in Oz. That was the contribution of Herman Mankiewicz. But the contribution of Yip Harburg was to say, if Kansas is black and white and Oz is color, why not go all the way with color? Why not make the rainbow the symbol of Dorothy's yearning? All right, Arlen took the title and ran with it. He composed the famous melody for the song on his way to Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. Really came up with the idea, I believe, at the drugstore where Mervyn LeRoy supposedly discovered Lana Turner. But Yip was not pleased when he heard it. He thought it was too complex. Harold, this is a 12-year-old girl wanting to be somewhere over the rainbow. It's not Nelson Eddy. Arlen tried to write a new tune, but couldn't match the power and poignancy of his original inspiration. So he asked his partner to reconsider. Yip asked Ira Gershwin for advice. Ira suggested Arlen abandon his grandiose piano accompaniment, play it instead like a pop song. That made the difference. Yip Harburg relented. That's where we get Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It was difficult to write the lyrics, but Arlen began with a dramatic octave leap. Yip soon realized it would work by changing the line from the other side to over the rainbow. For the sound of the long O, the mellifluence of the long O. And that led him to the opening word somewhere, which fit the octave accension perfectly. It was everything he wanted and more. It became the greatest American popular song of the 20th century. Here's Yip Harburg talking about his creative process.
I belong to a special tribe of what used to be called troubadours. Sometimes they were called minstrels. Now we're called songwriters. We worked for, in our songs, a sort of a better world, a rainbow world. Now my generation, unfortunately, never succeeded in creating that rainbow world, so we can't hand it down to you. But we could hand down our songs, which still hang on to hope and laughter, so that in times of confusion like these, when all the world is a hopeless jumble and the raindrops tumble all around, heaven opens a magic lane. When purple clouds darken up the skyway, there's a lovely highway to be found, leading from your window pane to a spot behind the sun, just a step beyond the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles look like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, birds fly over that rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I? Any little bird can fly beyond the rainbow. Why, oh,
Oh.
Okay.
Excuse me, to interrupt. Everybody should mute their,
Okay, great. Thank you, Marlene. It was okay. All right. Okay, I think we've solved it.
okay.
Well, all right. So at the heart of the movie, there is that music. In fact, this was one of the contributions of Jewish producers and Jewish composers to the tradition of the Broadway and the Hollywood musical. What do we mean by this? Oscar Hammerstein in the theater with Showboat, and Arthur Freed in the movies with The Wizard of Oz. Yip Harburg, they conceived of the songs not just as interludes, but as carrying the story and revealing character. And so The Wizard of Oz was one of perhaps 3 or 4 major Hollywood films in the 1930s in which the musicals are constructed in such a way that the songs advance the story. The songs reveal character. And that became the major tradition of both the Broadway and the Hollywood musical from this period on. That was Arthur Freed's contribution in the movies. That was Oscar Hammerstein's contribution, Jerome Kern's contribution in Broadway musicals. And speaking of Broadway talent, here is The Cowardly Lion. This is the great Bert Lahr, born Irving Lahrstein, or I can't remember the exact name. A Jewish vaudevillian, never got beyond the 8th grade, but one of the great talents. Eventually, he would go on to star in the first production of Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Who got him this role? His friend Yip Harburg recommended him for the role of the Cowardly Lion. So Harburg brought the Gershwin sensibility into the music along with his partner Harold Arlen. He also brought the age-old tradition of Jewish yearning for a better world, but at the same time committed to good clowning. And again, this is something I think which is characteristic of these great Jewish figures of the 1930s, 1940s. On the one hand, they're drawing on that Jewish aspiration for a better world. We see it in the Gershwins, Porgy and Bess as well. On the other hand, lots of wordplay, lots of wit, lots of humor, and nobody does it better than Bert Lahr. Let's see him in action.
Here, go away and let us alone.
Oh, scared, huh? Afraid, huh? How long can you stay fresh in that can? Come on, get up and fight, you shivering junkyard. Put your hands up, you lopsided bag of hay.
Now that's getting personal, Lion. Yes, get up and teach him a lesson. Well, what's wrong with you teaching him? Well, I hardly know him.
It's you anyway, Pee-wee.
Shame on you.
What did you do that for? I didn't buy them.
No, but you tried to. It's bad enough picking on a straw man, but when you go around picking on poor little dogs.
Well, you didn't have to go and hit me, did you? Is my nose bleeding?
Well, of course not. My goodness, what a fuss you're making. Well, naturally, when you go around picking on things weaker than you are, why, you're nothing but a great big coward.
You're right. I am a coward. I haven't any courage at all. I even scare myself. Look at the cycles under my eyes. I haven't slept in weeks.
Why don't you try counting sheep?
That doesn't do any good. I'm afraid of them.
Oh, that's too bad. Don't you think the wizard could help him too?
I don't see why not. Why don't you come along with us? We're on our way to see the wizard now, to get him a heart.
And him a brain.
I'm sure he could give you some courage.
Well, wouldn't you feel degraded to be seen in the company of a cowardly lion? I would.
Oh, of course not.
Gee, that's awfully nice of you. My life has been simply unbearable.
Oh, well, it's all right now. The wizard will fix everything.
All right, and one song by Bert Lahr. Let's hear it. Oh, sorry. Sorry, that's not it. I don't think I have it. I apologize. But there's the great biography of Bert Lahr, and it's by his son, John Lahr. Bert Lahr never got past 8th grade, but John Lahr became one of our greatest critics and biographers. And this is his biography, his tribute to his father. All right, let's conclude. Though Somewhere Over the Rainbow is his most famous song, and one of the most famous songs ever written, named #1 song of the 20th century in the AFI, American Film Institute poll. He's written lyrics for many other classics, including It's Only a Paper Moon, with music by Harold Arlen, Groucho Marx's signature song, Lydia the Tattooed Lady, and so on. His songs, as we've said, reflect an America beyond Broadway, the America of breadlines, poverty, and the downtrodden. He affirmed the political symbolism he found in Oz. The scarecrow heartland farmer who feels he's too dumb to think through, though he has abundant wisdom. The factory worker so dehumanized by the assembly line that he's reduced to a tin man with no heart. Even Ding Dong, the witch is dead, rings with the exultation of the little people rejoicing at the fall of a tyrant. Okay. One other point about his contribution to the film, Yip Harburg, it wasn't just that he wrote the lyrics for those brilliant songs. It turns out that although there were 10 writers, 10 professionals, he also doctored the screenplay. He had the last edit. Very few people know this, but he wrote much of the dialogue in the film. Again, it was he who conceived the integration of the songs into the plot 5 years prior to Rogers and Hammerstein's Oklahoma. He was script writer, in effect, number 11. It was he who pulled the whole thing together, wrote his own lines, gave the thing a coherence and unity, which made it a work of art. So if we're looking for the secret Jewish history of The Wizard of Oz, we find it not just with the producer, Mervyn LeRoy, and the associate producer, Arthur Freed. We find it especially with the songwriters, with Harold Arlen, with, above all, Yip Harburg. Okay, so it's the moment that we've all been waiting for. I was going to sing the song myself, but I don't like to sing into my computer, so I'm going to let Judy Garland do it for us. Here it is, Somewhere Over the Rainbow by Judy Garland, with Judy Garland.
Place where there isn't any trouble. Do you suppose there is such a place, Toto? There must be. It's not a place you can get to by a boat or a train. It's far, far away. Behind the moon, beyond the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies all dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh, why can't I? If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't
All right. Well, there are many things that we love about The Wizard of Oz, but I think that without that song, again, there is no no film. And believe it or not, Louis B. Mayer wanted to cut the song from the film, and Arthur Freed had to beg him to put it back in. And of course, he did. And that is one of the things that we remember that makes the film such a classic. And where does that come from? It comes from, believe it or not, Yip Harburg's socialism, coming from a Jewish immigrant family on the Lower East Side of New York. It comes from his socialist politics, but at a deeper level, in a longer perspective, it comes straight out of a Jewish tradition that goes all the way back to the book of Genesis. In other words, if you think about it, what is the contribution of biblical literature to world culture? Above all, it is the aspiration towards a better world over time. It is the biblical injunction to seek a better world that is the great theme of Genesis, of the Hebrew Bible. The very idea that such a thing is possible didn't really occur even to the ancient Greeks, who really thought in terms of a cyclical view of human history. Human nature doesn't change. Human history tells the same story over and over again. It was the writers of the Hebrew Bible who conceived of a world in which human beings could aspire to something better and could, and in fact, make a contribution towards achieving it. And I think that is where ultimately the song comes from. Somewhere over the rainbow, it is the aspiration for a better world. Somewhere over the rainbow, over the sea, wherever it might be. That is a Jewish theme that goes back 3,000 years. Okay, so a little footnote, there's Toto and Judy. Toto was not a male dog. Toto was a female named Terry. I don't know any more about Toto than that, except that Toto was difficult on the set, but Toto was, in fact, Terry. Nothing Jewish there, I admit, but let's go out with one more version of our theme song. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And let's have some conversation. Let's open up for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. I had a good question about the last song.
Yeah.
That was clever, intermixing the old Shaker song, but composed by Aaron Copland, another Jewish person.
No, used by Aaron Copland.
Sorry?
He didn't compose it. It was used.
I mean that. That's what I mean, but
he didn't compose it. Oh,
no, I know. It's an old Shaker
in Appalachian Spring as
Just
part
wanted
of
to add
one of the
another
themes in Appalachian
to the
Spring
mix.
by Aaron Copland.
It's a traditional Amish song.
Shaker song. Yes.
Yeah. I just want to say that if people want to ask questions, they can either text them in that chat box and Bruce can look them over, or we can try to take turns verbally asking questions, but that's tricky. We'll try.
Marlene, people can raise their hand to be called on.
Okay, so that we find that in, I forget, participants. If you go to participants
below.
Yeah. But I don't think that's that. I don't know. Bruce, it's up to you how you prefer to field the questions.
Should we start with the chat box and then we can have other questions as well?
I don't know how to do the chat box, but I have an interesting thing to tell you.
You go first, Eleanor, and then we'll do some chat box.
Okay. My grandmother worked at MGM during making the Wizard of Oz, and she was in charge of the Munchkins.
Really?
Wow.
Literally, she rode herd on the Munchkins, which was not easy. And she told one of them got pregnant. Anyway, she was at Metro for a good 5 years.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, there are lots of stories about the Munchkins, and some of them were a bit on the wild side and drank a little bit too much alcohol.
Yes, they did.
Yeah. So there were problems with the Munchkins, but they're wonderful. Without them, again, the film wouldn't be so special, wouldn't be as great as it is. And how that's amazing.
Well, that was her job.
Sorry?
That was her job.
That was her job. Incredible. She had quite a challenging job there.
She did.
Yeah.
That's my only comment, other than I have a picture of her with Louis B. Mayer.
Love to see it sometime.
So, Bruce, you have a question. What did Yip do during the years that he was blacklisted?
Gee, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm sure that he had a difficult time. I don't know what he did all of those years, but as you could see, it did not embitter him, because toward the end of his life, as you saw in that clip of him, he was as humane as ever. And you remember how he began by saying, "We wanted to leave you a better world, but we couldn't do it. But we put some of that into these songs, and that is our legacy, the Jewish songwriters. That's our legacy to you. Those songs, we couldn't change the world, but we left you the legacy of the aspiration for a better world embedded in our music."
Very well put.
Well put, says Bernard.
Thank you.
One of the earlier questions someone had was if you'd ever done a program on how Jews became so prominent in the film industry, and you certainly have for us and many times.
I think we did that about 10 years ago, but maybe we should try that again.
I think it's time to bring it back.
Okay.
And we actually, you did a similar thing with the movie Casablanca last year, and we initially had
Contribution.
we
Oh,
didn't
Marlene, we can't hear you.
for each. I'm sorry.
We couldn't hear you for a second there.
Oh, okay. But anyway, Bruce can do lots of great talks on Jews in Hollywood and the reasons for that, and Jews in popular culture in general, Jews in comedy, goes on. So let's see.
Cheryl Casp had her hand up.
No, I was clapping.
Oh, you were clapping. Okay, all right.
You-
Thank you, Bruce.
Oh, I thought I was clapping. I see my hand is up.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's okay.
Hmm.
I
Oh, here's Pat has a question. Did I think some of you saw the Saturday Night Seder with Jason Alexander and a cast of dozens. In it, Judith Light said, "Over the Rainbow" was written by Arlen in response to the rise of Nazism. Is that true, or?
It certainly must have been on their minds, given that late 1930s,
Right.
1938 was Kristallnacht. So the fate of the Jews of Germany in particular was of concern to them. I'm sure it was in the back of their minds, but the immediate trigger for the song was Harold Arlen's, sorry, not Harold Arlen, but Yip Harburg's idea that they needed a ballad. So they had these various up-tempo songs already written. This was the last song to be written. They needed a ballad, and Harburg had the idea that because the film was shifting from black and white to color, from Kansas to Oz, and again, that was largely Herman Mankiewicz's contribution, what could be more colorful than a rainbow? And what could better symbolize the aspiration for a better world than the idea of going over the rainbow, beyond the rainbow, way up high? So he was looking for a ballad. He was looking for something that would suggest yearning, yearning for a happier life. And that was something that was in tune with the culture of the 1930s, the era of the Great Depression, but also deeply embedded in the DNA of the Jewish inheritance. So it was principally Harburg who was the source of the song, not to take away anything from the brilliance of Harold Arlen.
Lauren Sudd asked or made the comment earlier that rainbows are also a part of Irish culture. And there's that great book, I know what she's referring to, but I don't know if it's called How the Jews Saved Ireland, but it's something like that. So, what else?
Yeah.
And we're the Oz Books socialist as well.
Good questions.
Mhm.
There's a little bit of socialism in the Oz books because in the 19th century, believe it or not, farmers tended to be on the left of the American political spectrum. So insofar as there was a critique of burgeoning American capitalism in the years after the Civil War, the years of the big railway companies, the Gilded Age, partly that came from oppressed workers in the factories, but partly it came from equally radical farmers on the prairie because they were in debt. They felt that the system was rigged against them. They didn't turn to the right in that period. They turned to the left. So there's something of that in the Oz books. But How the Jews Saved Ireland. The book is entitled How the Irish Saved Western Civilization, by Thomas, I've forgotten his last name. In any case, there's a relationship between the Jews and Ireland. There were 5,000 Jews in Ireland at the turn of the last century, and James Joyce, the greatest Irish writer, wrote his greatest novel about a Jewish Dubliner. But the fact that there are rainbows also in Irish culture, and that the rainbow is a symbol in Genesis after the flood, I believe that is just a coincidence.
Finian's Rainbow was written by Yip Harburg and Burton Lane.
There we are. Yeah. So he's drawing on. It's a story about Ireland, or about an Irish itinerant entertainer, and Harburg is once again drawing on the rainbow image. Absolutely, and I'm sure that's connected with his work on The Wizard of Oz.
Any more questions?
Another question was this the first Technicolor film?
No, it was not the first Technicolor film. There were experiments with color in the silent period, but Technicolor films, I believe the technology was invented in the early 30s. The inventor died. His widow kept a grip on the patent, and therefore her name appears on every Technicolor film as the technical advisor. Her name was Natalie Kalmus. I'm sure she was Jewish. But in any case, if you think about it, The Wizard of Oz was also in Technicolor in the same year, in 1939. So there were previously Technicolor films, but black and white remained the dominant convention for American films until the 1960s, till the middle of the 1960s. So there were Technicolor films before this. It took almost another 2 decades before color film became the standard.
Because it was so expensive.
Partly because it was so expensive, and it was a very laborious procedure to work with. I think it's called 3-strip Technicolor. It's just a lot more difficult than filming in black and white. But it was worth it in The Wizard of Oz. If any film was made for Technicolor,
That was
The Wizard of Oz. You can't follow the yellow brick road if the yellow brick road is gray.
Yetta asked a question. She heard that George Gershwin offered the idea of the coda if happy little bluebirds ... Is that, do you know about that?
I don't know about that. George Gershwin died, I don't know if he died in 37 or early in 38, but he died of a brain tumor, sadly, and he was still very young. He was still in his, I believe, in his 30s.
32 or something, or 34.
Yeah, so it's a tremendous loss. But that was one of the points that I was, that interested me so much, is that Harburg and Arlen were very similar to the Gershwin brothers in their partnership, in their teamwork. Arlen was second to Gershwin in terms of his originality as a composer, and nobody wrote better lyrics, better and more inventive rhymes than Harburg, other than Ira Gershwin. So there is something of the Gershwin example embedded in The Wizard of Oz. Even, I'm not quite sure about that specific example. It's very possible. I don't know, but definitely there is a debt to the Gershwins.
Oh, a tidbit. Judy Garland was not Jewish, but 2 of her 5 husbands were Jewish.
Oh, there
Thank
you
you,
go.
Julie Lorraine, for that.
Yeah, Sid Luft was one of them.
And Davy Rose.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, she was certainly not Jewish. Her original name was Frances Gum, I believe, and she was part of a sister act. But obviously, she worked frequently with Jewish producers and songwriters, and there's a close association between her and Hollywood's Jewish community.
In 2017, her children had her body exhumed from the mausoleum in New York and reburied in Los Angeles at the Forever Hollywood, the Jewish section of the Forever Hollywood Cemetery.
Had no idea.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Right. Well,
Any other comments or thoughts or?
The question is there, how old was Judy Garland when the film was made?
She was 16. So she was a little bit older than her character was supposed to be. But she was had already been recognized as the next major younger star. So Deanna Durbin had made a fortune for Universal with her brilliance. And she was just, I think, a bit older than Judy Garland. And I think that Arthur Freed recognized that MGM had a talent with Judy Garland, not quite the same kind of voice as Deanna Durbin, because her voice was nearly operatic, but that she could do for MGM what Deanna Durbin had done for Universal and what Shirley Temple had done for Fox. That she was the next big star, even though she was still in her teens, and they could tell that her voice was special. Well, you didn't have to be a genius to tell that. To know that. Yeah. There's a question, yes?
Unmute. So I have this vivid, the film was made in 39. I was born in 45. I have this vivid memory of the first time I saw it. And I'm wondering, because we're all in a, maybe a 15-year age bracket from each other, when other people saw the film, how old were you when you saw it? Do you recall?
Great question. I know that I saw it every single year for many, many years as a treat, and got to have a TV dinner set up on a tray in front of the TV.
I remember seeing it when I was about 5 years old, and it was terrifying. The parts with the witch just really freaked me out, and I used to hide behind our television was in our mom and dad's bedroom, and I used to hide behind the bed when the witch was on screen. We watched it every year.
I ran out of the theater in the Bronx, the Vogue Theater, when The Wicked Witch appeared, and I never went back into that theater. I didn't see that
traumatizing
again for years.
Margaret Hamilton was brilliant in the part of the Wicked Witch. The film did not make money on its initial run in 1939. When it was rediscovered for television in the 50s and became an annual event, that's when it began to make money and became the great American classic that it is.
Mm-hmm.
So just in time for us to see it on television.
Mm-hmm. Was it particularly expensive to make at the time?
Yes, it was. It was very expensive, and $3 million was a lot of money in 1939. So it did well, but if you factor in the overhead and the cost of distributing the prints and so on paper, it lost $1 million. So it was a very expensive film to make. Yeah. Yes.
I saw it at Radio City Music Hall. My dad took me, and I remember we were waiting in line, and a very tall, slender man in front of us fell down. And I decided at that age that he had fallen down because he was too tall.
Oh my goodness.
I must have been maybe 5.
Right, right. Yeah.
Controversial views on Jews by Elfring Baum.
Are there some new messages in the chat? Let's see.
How someone asks, well, it's a comment more general than about the movie. The question of why Jews love to speak about Jewish accomplishments, which is interesting topic.
Well, I'm sure that people of various ethnic groups like to speak about the accomplishments of members of their respective groups, but in the case of the Jews, there are so many accomplishments to speak about, and I think for people who've had more than their share of difficulties over their long history, I think it's some kind of consolation to be able to point against the anti-Semites to all of these Jewish contributions to so many different fields of modern society and culture. In every discipline, in every branch of entertainment, in the sciences, in journalism, in business, and so on and so forth, I think it's quite a natural reflex for people to do that, especially if they've been marginalized and persecuted as Jews have.
Can I say something? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I was the one who wrote that chat, and it came up in my life because I had a stepdaughter who asked me that question. Why are Jews always pointing out he was Jewish or she was Jewish, some famous person? And on the spur of the moment, I had to come up with an answer that made sense. And I said, well, it's partly because we're proud of our achievements, and it's partly the psychology of the minority, which is what you just said. It was an interesting question to be asked. She thought it was very chauvinistic for Jews to always be pointing to a famous person who happened to be Jewish. So that was an interesting question to be asked by someone in the family, who didn't understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. My grandfather used to give me false identifications. According to my grandfather, Christopher Columbus was Jewish. Greta Garbo.
Lots of the members of the crew were diversos.
That is true.
According to my grandmother, that we used to watch Ed Solomon every Sunday night.
Solomon.
Nice Jewish boy on TV, and we can watch this.
There you go.
Ed Sullivan was Jewish?
Ed Sullivan, no. Ed was Irish. But I'll tell you a Columbus story. So who discovered America? Okay. Columbus probably had Jewish ancestors. It's not unlikely. But we know for certain that the navigator that he chose was a converso, was Jewish.
Yes.
Why would he do that? I'm sure the man had good cartographical skills and so on. But also he believed that he was going to China. And Jews know Eastern languages. How different could Hebrew be from Chinese? The navigator was the first one to go ashore, and he saw these men semi-naked, smoking what later turned out to be what we call tobacco, and he addressed them in Hebrew. The first European who went ashore in 1492 spoke Hebrew.
Yes.
Wow.
That's a great story.
Who knew that?
Read Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean.
That's a book, yes.
Well. Anybody else? Eleanor?
Someone's speaking, but
I
forget.
think, Eleanor, you're on mute. Can we unmute her?
Let's see.
People think that Columbus's crew was Sephardic escaping Spain. Tie the dates together.
Well, some members of the crew were conversos.
Yes.
They were pretending to be Christian, but they were still, in fact,
Right.
Jewish. Yeah. And
I knew that about the navigator, but I've since read that many conversos.
very possible.
Well, it was 1492 after all.
1492.
August 2nd, 1492, the three ships sailed. That's the date of the Inquisition from the King and Queen.
That's what I meant, Barry.
No coincidence.
Right.
No question at all.
Good point.
Well, Bruce, I think we will close it up now. Only if you promise to do this again soon.
I promise. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
It was great.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody for attending, and we'll see you next time. Over the rainbow.
Movies.
Thanks, Martha.
Thank you. Over
Thank
the
you.
rainbow.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Hmm.